What's going on, guys? Time for another episode of Choir Practice. This is a pretty humbling one. I'm super excited to have this special guest. I got to go through our typical quick shout-outs. First of all, this guy. Tell them all who you are.
Hey, I'm Bernie Helms, retired police officer from Manchester, Connecticut.
Awesome. And tell them about Blue Angels real quick.
Blue Angels Foundation, thanks again for those who supported us during the holiday season. We were able to help out over 1,000 kids. Before Christmas and on Christmas Day, I had the dear pleasure of delivering toys to kids with my former police department in Manchester on Christmas morning with their beautiful families. Nothing better. So thanks for helping make that happen.
Big shout out to Warrior 12, my favorite apparel company. They sent me another shirt. He who kneels before God can stand before anyone. Absolutely love this. Little quick shout outs to Minutemen Coffee, my favorite coffee. Ted Nugent's favorite coffee too.
Hey, Warrior 12.
Uh-oh.
The B-side is coming out. You know, we're doing the videos. I'm wearing your hat. Can I get some swag, guys?
You're actually not wearing their hat right now.
No,
so.
Because I'm not doing the B-side right now.
Well, I'm just saying, if you're going to try and convince them to send you more stuff, you got to actually wear the hat on the show.
What I'm trying to show is that I'm a naked man here. I need some clothes.
Okay, we're not doing OnlyFans today. All right, so Warrior 12, hook the guy up, and Minutemen, send him some coffee. Do you even drink coffee?
I've been drinking it all day.
I said coffee, not whiskey.
Coffee is all day.
All right, one real quick announcement. I have moved to Florida. I am out of Connecticut, but we are keeping the studio here, the Law Enforcement Today studio in Connecticut. And so for all those of you who are hitting us up, asking about coming onto the show, we are going to continue to film here about 10 minutes away from Bradley International Airport. Be prepared to surrender your firearms and pay your taxes when you land in the state. They will not hand them back to you when you leave. All right.
But you're protected by the best law enforcement in America.
The absolute best. Who are you?
My name is Matt Griffin, and it is, when I tell you, this is so humbling and just an honor to be here. I never feel like I should be sitting at a table like this, if that makes any sense. But my name is Matt Griffin, former law enforcement, 21 years in the Navy, and then retired out of Keene, New Hampshire Police Department. Spent the better part of my career working in narcotics, and then been out of law enforcement now since 2017.
Don't be too humbled. We have like 7 people. You have more people in the studio right now watching this show than are going to watch it.
I know. I'll tell you. My heart is. If you probably see my heart pounding out of my chest, but we're going to do the best we can to keep it going. So bring some energy, and that's the best I can do.
You've known this guy for a while. I'm going to let you lead this show.
So this is, so I've read Matt's book, The Journey to Midnight. It's an incredible piece, and seriously, it's written by a police officer, who's still here with us through the grace of God, right? And but I will say to anybody out there that this book is powerful for anyone who's struggling. You don't have to be a police officer. That just happened to be the subject matter of this book. But for anyone who's struggling and anybody who needs help, please read this book. And if you can't afford this book, you can reach out to me at LET. I will get you a copy and send it to you. It's that important, because we lose too many people to suicide every day. And as we speak right now, someone is probably taking their last breath at their own hands. And that is just terrible. We're losing mothers, brothers, sisters, aunts, friends. And we need to be better about trying to save our souls. Because sometimes it is up to us. And sometimes it makes a difference when you tell someone you love them.
100%.
When you just check in on somebody, you good, how you doing today? If we see people struggling, we're supposed to help them. We have to be unlike our medical community, right? We can't wait until the problem happens. When we see it happening in front of us, we have to be on top of it, right? We are brothers and sisters keepers.
So I want to give you some affirmation that you're on the right path with sharing your story. Last year, sitting in the office, and I have a delivery that comes in. Open up the box, no return address on there. There's a handwritten note in this bottle of Van Winkle, which I'm sure if you're familiar with bourbon, you're very familiar with this. Yeah. And you'll see it's unopened. I could never open this because there's a handwritten note in there. No signature. I don't know if it's a man, a woman, and they basically said that they were scrolling through Facebook and they were trying to get the courage to take their own life. They had their gun in their hand, and they stopped on a video that we had put out years before. How it ended up in their newsfeed that day, I have no idea. Yeah. In the video, we had an officer, a friend of mine, who talked about the second time he put his gun in his mouth. Yeah. And he was preparing to pull the trigger, and his kid walked in and saw him and said, "Daddy, what are you doing?" and his kid saved his life, and he shared that story publicly, and we put that video out there. And so this officer said, that story that you guys put out there, that video saved my life. I'm here today because of you guys, and I just wanted to send a bottle of whiskey to the whiskey wall. So the work that you're doing, man, you will never know how many lives you are saving just by sharing your story. So
Man, I really appreciate that. You know, it's interesting. When I started the research for the book and everything that came out from the book, I started looking at trauma. And there was a really interesting stat that I found, and it said the average person has been through in a lifetime somewhere between 2, 3 to 5 critical incidents, 3 to 5, let's just say 5 on a whole in a lifetime. The average police officer or first responder in a 25-year career goes through between 300 and 400. And I had this aha moment. I'm like, that's a lot. And, you know, and that research really started to kind of populate. And really, I think the book saved my life more than anything else. And we've talked about this a lot, but what I really gained, you know, from the book was just understanding that after trauma, when trauma hits, and everybody in this room can appreciate this because we've all been through some form of trauma, and everybody listening really, you know, for that matter, this isn't about law enforcement or first responders or military, this is about people and human beings. We've all seen something that hurts and that we think about. And the more you see that trauma, the more your brain becomes wired for protection. And I think that's such a you know, a very important point for anybody that's listening, and because it was integral into my, I don't even want to say the ability for me to be better, to heal or whatever, because I'm still broken, but, you know, I learned that as much as we're usually wired for connection and we want to talk to everybody, we want to hang out, we want to chop things up, and we want to have, you know, everything else, the more trauma that you go through, your brain becomes wired for protection. And it started to make sense, right? I always thought it was cool, like, to not sit with my back towards the, you know, I always facing the door and everything else. Like, oh, that's just a cool thing that they teach you that we do as cops when we're in the academy. Like, all these different things that cops do, right? And like, cool, I want to be that too. And you know, I always say the biggest failure that I was ever taught was by one of my senior cops. And go back to Virginia Beach. And here I am. I was a search and rescue swimmer in the Navy. I'm in primo shape. I'm you know, decided to become a Virginia Beach Police Department. That's a whole other crazy story. Because I was never one of those guys that's like, oh, I want to be a cop. You know, it was actually a backup plan. I was going to stay in the Navy my whole life, and I got waitlisted by this program to send me off to college to be an officer, right? And so like, my brother up in Virginia is like, Matt, what are you going to do if you don't get this? I'm like, I don't fucking know. I'm like, I've never not gotten something, you know, I never thought about that. And he's like, why don't you go down and apply to Virginia Beach as a police officer? I'm like, you know what, that's a good idea. Like, I would love to drive fast, kick doors, and do cool shit like that. And I show up, and I shit you not, there was 3,000 people for 30 spots. I look around, and there's like thousands of people to take this PT test. And it was like, I felt like I was at a concert. I'm like, what the? I'm like, am I in the right place? Like, y'all want to be cops? And
now it's 30 people for 3,000 spots.
That's what I'm saying. You get 4 people for 30 spots, right. You know? And it's the same 4 that's been taking the test for 5 years, right? And so I just kept making it to the next step. I remember calling my wife at the time, and I'm like, I'm not getting this. I'm like, we better like prepare for the Navy thing, like. And so I just kept making it through to the next stage. And all of a sudden on a Friday, they called me like, hey, we're offering you a spot in the 36th Police Academy. I was like, for real? He was like, yeah. I said, well, I was really thinking that I was going to be in the Navy and I was going to do the Seaman Admiral thing for my life. How long can you give me? Because I got waitlisted on this. He's like, man, I'll give you an hour. Like, I'm sorry, it sounded like you said an hour. He's like, yeah, no, like 60 minutes and starting right now. It's like 59 and a half. I'm like, shit. And so that's how I became a cop. When I came into Virginia Beach, here I was, you know, I finished as the top recruit out of the academy class, and, you know, it's because I'd done so much shooting and PT and things like that in the Navy. And so I get to the 3rd precinct, and my very first call on my own, right? Everybody in this room can remember the day that you drive by yourself, right? Because what happens is you got this guy that's sitting next to you or this female sitting next to you, and they just tell you everything, like where to shit, like when you can get coffee. Like, you don't put your blinker on, they're screaming at you about your DOR. And like, finally that day comes where like you look to your right and there's nobody sitting there. You're like, fuck yeah. Like, I will make a left turn right now without a signal on, and nobody is dinging me today, you know? And so I'm making left turns or right turns without signals, like, yeah, Yeah, and it just felt good, right? Like taking my seatbelt off just because I could, turning the siren on just because, like, yeah, I can do that now. Like anyway, so I'm driving around doing shit that I wasn't supposed to do because that's what we do when we're on our own for the first time. And all of a sudden the code call comes out, and it was a 21-year-old kid that was unconscious, not breathing. And I remember, damn, so I fly down there, I'm the first one on the scene. And at this time in Virginia Beach, you had to check the body to make sure there's nothing suspicious. And so I get there and I run upstairs, it was this kind of, I can still see it today. Like, how crazy is that here we are in 2024 and I can see it. That's trauma. And I go running up the stairs and the door's open and you go up and there's the room and he's stripped down naked and he's laying down on the floor and there's just a big puddle of blood. And on the corner of the blood I saw a yellow sticky note. Or could have been more than that, I'm not really sure. And I started moving the body around to make sure there was nothing suspicious about this. And I moved the sticky note out and I realized that this man had written a suicide note, but the blood had washed away everything that he wanted to say. And I remember how that made me feel. And it was just this awkward feeling. And there's a point to my story, I promise. And I remember just like, we finished up the call, whatever, and I get home that night, my wife at the time was like, how was your first day on your own? I said, it was good. I said, but there's just one thing that's really bothering me. This man, this 21-year-old Navy kid, he shot himself, and he wrote a suicide note, but he wasn't able to tell the world what he wanted to say. He took his own life for a reason, and he didn't get to tell people that reason. And so, I was able to sleep. I wasn't, in that aspect of it. But the next day I come to work, and I found one of my senior guys, and I said, hey, man, I'm struggling. He's like, what's up, Griff? I said, that call yesterday, that suicide attempt yesterday, I said that man committed suicide and he wrote a note and he wanted to say something to the world before he took his own life and the blood had washed it away. And he said to me, and here's the point of how I'm getting back to this. He said, if you're not strong enough to see it, then this isn't the job for you. Yeah. And he got in his cruiser and drove away. That's the only thing he said to me and rolled away. And I'm 22 years old, 23 years old, whatever I was at the time, and I'm impressionable. And what do we want to do in the academy? We want to be just like those cops. We want to be just like that person. We want to sit with our back not facing the door so we can see people coming in because but the reason behind all of that, right, is because of trauma. And the average law enforcement officer sees 300 to 400 critical traumatic incidents in a career, and yet we don't want to talk about this. So I commend you guys for having me on this show and taking the opportunity to talk about this because, just like you said, man, like, I had a phone call yesterday with Ben. If you ever get a chance to read the book, Ben's one of the guys that saved my life, or not one of the guys. Ben is the guy that saved my life, and we talk almost weekly, and he said, you remember such and such? I said, yeah. I said, I didn't really work with him. He worked with the older guys. He said he took his own life last week. And I said, damn, Ben. He said, yeah, and he went in to go in to talk about it. He said he when we arrived on scene, he had all of his benefits laid out. He had all of his passwords laid out. He had all of his accounts laid out. And so it wasn't a suicide note. He was just making sure that everybody had access to everything. And that breaks my heart that we don't feel comfortable enough to say I'm struggling, man, and that's not okay. That's not okay. And I just want to say thank you guys for having me on the show, and I want to thank everybody that's here for being here because, when I walked in, I was so nervous to see everybody, and but it just means that we're getting there. We are. The fact that Kyle and you guys are doing this is we're getting there. Anyway, I'm sorry. I get going, man.
So let's, why don't we start taking this journey?
Yeah.
We'll take it through the book a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Benny.
Yeah. And again, for anybody that's listening, I just want to preface and say, look, we're going to talk about some tough things probably for the next couple of minutes, and I just want to let you know that it's going to be okay. And that if you need help, the help is out there. And again, if anybody's welcome to reach out to me. I'm not a trained clinician or a counselor, but I promise you I'll listen. And that's probably all I can say to you is that I'll listen. I can tell you what helped save my life. But yeah, man, so the start of my downfall, I guess you will, and the start really of the book, like I said, I was in the Navy and got into Virginia Beach Police, and I'm in the 3rd precinct, and I'm running and gunning, man. I'm one of the youngest cops, just hustling dope and everything else. And so as a young badge, I got assigned over to what's called the 3rd Precinct into what's called the Lake Edwards subdivision, which is Section 8. And so one day, I think this is a couple days before Christmas, maybe the 21st or 22nd, I'm driving on Lake Edwards, and as I come through, I see my buddy Benny and his son on the front yard playing, and Norfolk's right around the corner, so Norfolk's a major naval station. So I pull over, I'm like, yo, man, I'm like, what's up, man? He's like, Griff, he's like, you're a cop now? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I'm like, I guess you're stationed here in Norfolk. He's like, yeah. He's like, meet my son, meet Benny Jr. He's like, matter of fact, I want you to come inside. I want you to meet Brittany. I want you to meet my other 6-month-old. So I go inside and meet all of them. And I remember little Benny Jr., you know, he's like looking at me with these big, like, deer eyes, like big, like, you know, like when you're a child, you look at that gun as like a cannon in somebody's hip, you know? And he's like, what are you doing for Christmas? And I said, man, I'm sure I got to work. I said, I'm a younger badge. And he said, well, I got a whole bunch of people coming over. Why don't you come get you a plate? And I said, I would love to do that. I will take you up on that. He's like, I want you to meet, you know, the rest of the family and everything else. And I was going to be right around the corner. And I'm sorry, he was on Hampshire Boulevard in the Lake Edwards subdivision. And so I'm around the corner, and I came back on Christmas Day, and I got a plate. And I remember little Benny was in the kitchen, right? And he's on this little step stool, and he's cutting up Christmas cookies. And I'm like, what you doing, man? And he looks up and he's showing me all these Christmas cookies and everything else, man. And I'll always have that memory in my head, and I'll keep that as long as, if I get emotional, I'm sorry.
All right.
But he looked up and he said, Mr. Griffin, you're a police officer. You know how like a 2-year-old or a 2.5-year-old says that? And I felt like the pride in my heart, you know, like your chest puffs up. You're like, yeah, bro. Yeah, I am, you know. And he's like, that's so cool. And so, so dinner was great, man. I got a plate with them and hung out for a little bit. And so fast forward a couple of days to New Year's Eve. And again, once again, I'm the younger badge. I draw the short straw. So I'm out writing down license plates at this trap house right around the corner. And as I'm writing down license plates about like 4:30-ish, and all of a sudden a call comes out. And, you know, I don't know if the other guys in here, but in Virginia Beach, when a hot call comes out, they call it tones, right? And so it's like doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. So everybody gets alerted that we have a code 2 call or a code 1 call, right? And so the tones come out, and I'm listening to it, and I hear doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Units 325, Units 326, respond to 767 Hampshire Lane, 2.5-year-old code gray. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, man, that is just a shitty call for New Year's Eve. If you're not familiar, a 2.5-year-old or a code gray means unconscious, not breathing. And so I sat there and I'm like, that's a shitty fucking call, man, for New Year's Eve. And 10 seconds, 20 seconds, I hear the units, 325, I'm responding from such and such, 326, I'll be responding from West End. Fuck! 767 Hampshire Lane, that's Benny Jr. So I dropped the car in the drive, and I pulled up on the front lawn. I was still the first officer to get there. And I remember I running inside, and there was Brittany screaming. She's holding a 6-month-old, and she's screaming. She's pointing into Benny's bedroom. And so, you know, fly the door open, and she had taken the 6-month-old and gone into the bathroom to take a shower, and she put on Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Matter of fact, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was still playing on the TV. And so Benny Jr., being the little monkey that he is, he climbs up onto the windowsill, and at this point, they had those blind cords that they weren't separated, and so he took the blind cords and he went to go try and swing from the windowsill to the dresser, and it caught him around the neck and hung him. And so I bring him down, and you know, anybody that's been inside of these traumatic situations knows like the world slows down. If you're lucky, the world slows down. If you know, depending on your trauma response and critical incidents, things like that. So the world starts to slow down. And I put him down on the ground, and I start doing CPR. And I remember Brittany screaming behind me, save my firecracker, because he was born on the 4th of July. He would have been 21 years old. So I'm doing CPR, and all of a sudden I get a breath. And you know that feeling when you catch a breath, and I remember the hope in my heart, and I said, I got him back, I brought him back. Like, this isn't gonna end like this. And as I was doing my chest compressions, I realized that was the last breath that he was ever gonna take. I always say that there's a little bit of Benny inside of me because of that. And And so fire and EMS, they show up and they kind of push me off and I kind of roll off. And I remember looking up, and on the wall, there's the scratch marks of him trying to get down. And we talked about this a little bit, man, but those scratch marks stayed with me for a long time. You know why? Because I fucking sat in my cruiser for 30 seconds. Why didn't I just respond, Kyle? Why didn't I just go? Why didn't I just put the car in drive? Somebody needs help. It wasn't my call, but why don't I go? And no, there's nobody here, there's nobody in this room, there's nobody in this side of the earth that's gonna tell me that if I didn't respond when the call came out that I couldn't have saved his life. And so Brittany, she weighed on me real heavily until Ben Sr. got back from he had to go out to sea for a couple of days. And so, here I am with their family and they're weighing a lot on me, and, they had me help with they had to do like an autopsy, and then we had to do the wake. We had to dress Benny Jr. and, and I'll never look at Spider-Man the same way. He was just a big Spider-Man person. So we dressed him up for the funeral in his Spider-Man outfit. And how do you tell somebody that this is your fault, that this 2.5-year-old child that's laying in this coffin right here is your fault? And that's what I took with me for the next 5, 6, 7 years, and I didn't sleep for a long time. Because how do you say to somebody that this is my fault? I did this because I didn't fucking respond. And I ate that for a long, long time. And that was the start of just a series of bad decisions, a series of traumatic events. And again, that's just one. Everybody in this room has more than that, has multiple of those, and we talked a little bit about this before. We all have that. You look and you blame yourself for something that you could have did. I made a right turn instead of a left turn, or why didn't I go through that light? I could have done A, B, and C. And why did I do this? Why did I do that? And we second guess ourselves all the way through what we're doing, and here we are, and and as we kind of keep moving this forward, go ahead.
No.
And I was gonna say, I just kept making really bad decisions from there. And because when you don't sleep, right, here's the thing about coping mechanisms, right? This is what I learned from writing this book and doing the research. What I learned about coping mechanisms, we all cope. Everybody in this room copes. Kyle copes, Bernie copes, Matt Griffin copes, we all cope. And we're gonna cope in some certain way. And what I learned about coping mechanisms is if it's a shitty coping mechanism, it's gonna fail you. If it's alcohol, if it's drugs, it's extramarital affairs, it's pornography, it's all these coping mechanisms that we wanna use to cover up and not deal with the trauma that we're hurting from. They're gonna fail you. And alcohol is gonna fail you at some point. Drugs are gonna fail you at some point. The gym's gonna fail you at some point. It's not gonna give you the answers that you need. It's not gonna give you the respite that you need from the trauma. And so, at that point, you got to realize that the trauma is going to rear its ugly head, and that's what's been happening in law enforcement, man. That's why I'm so blessed to have this ability, because it rears its ugly head, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're making a shitty decision on a street in Manchester, and somebody's got their cell phone out, and next thing you know, you make a five-second decision to punch somebody or to say something you shouldn't have said. And next thing you know, you're a convicted felon. And that's a problem, because we're not taking care of our own. And so, from there. I'm in Virginia Beach, and like clearly trauma is just overwhelming my life, and I couldn't sleep. And the thing about sleep is that it just puts you in this point where like you're aggressive, you're irritable, you're not doing the things that make you the person that you started off with. And and trauma in the police department, and trauma in the military, and trauma in life. And so I thought I could run. And so my wife at the time, my boy's mother, she's like, well, what do you think about moving up to New Hampshire? I said, I don't even know where New Hampshire is. I said, where is that? And I'd never been there in my life, and I drove up there, and I get to New Hampshire, and it's like these rolling streams, and people like skipping and frolicking at night, and like tipping cows and drinking bourbon and shit. I'm like, this is fucking cool. I'm like, so there's no Section 8 here? No. Like, there's like, people aren't like shooting each other all night long? Nope. I'm like, cool. I want my little 6-shooter, and I'm just gonna drive around, and I'm gonna wave, I'm gonna shake hands and kiss babies, and that's how I got up to Keene, New Hampshire, and it's a great little town, and I raised 4 boys there. But unfortunately, what happened was number one, I never addressed the trauma. And, you know, because we weren't allowed to talk about that. And now here I am, an outsider with big city experience, with all these different things that come along to it. You know, and most of the guys that I work with were born and raised in Keene, New Hampshire, went to high school together, and you got this good old boys club where like, fuck is this guy coming in, making car stops, tossing cars, trying to get dope, talking about heroin and things like that. And so it took a long time to even just have friends or to be part of something. And but I was fine with that, but then the opioid epidemic hits. And New Hampshire and Ohio really hit so hard. And so as that happens, they asked me if I wanted to go undercover. And I'm like, yep, let's do it. And I was tired of people overdosing and passing away because of fentanyl. And so I go undercover, and again, like cornrows in my hair, full sleeve of tattoos, man. I was just running and gunning, just doing what I'm good at. I grew up very poor, you know, outside New York City in northern New Jersey. And so I was very comfortable in the drug lifestyle. I was very comfortable with the packaging of narcotics, with the slang, with the terms, everything else. Like how we do things on the street corner was something that was just really second nature to me. And so it was easy for me to talk the talk inside of drug culture. And so went right back into it. We started running and gunning, and right around July, August of 2016, I came home. And my wife of 15 years, she said to me, I don't know you. She said, I don't know this person. I don't know who you are. And I looked at her and I said, really? And again, let me preface it by saying I take full responsibility for my divorce, and I'll be the first. There's a chapter in here, and the first thing I say in that chapter, this sounds like a public apology. It's because it is. And I forgot how to be Matt Griffin. All I was an undercover cop, day in and day out. I mean, think about it. I mean, when you're running a gun and going to strip clubs, and you got $1,000 in your pockets, and then you come home, you're like, oh, honey, let's take the kids to Longhorn, man. I just seized 2 kilos. I just did X, Y, and Z. And I remember her looking at me, and she was like, we can't afford to go to Longhorn. We got 4 kids. That's like $200. I'm like, I've got a wad of probably $2,000 in my pocket. I'm like, that's interesting, you know? And how many times did I get out to date night and lay out all 4 of my phones? Am I paying attention to the person that's taking care of my children, that's supporting me day in and day out? But here I am standing across from her like, what? What do you mean, this person? Like, I'm doing great things. I'm saving lives every day. And, you know, so we wound up separating, and the divorce was finalized on January 5th of 2017. But from August until January 5th, the one person that always checked on me was my former partner and our chief of police, Brian. And Brian was always there, man. Like he's that dude. Everybody in this room knows that guy. Status check. Hey, Griff, you good? Are you all right? Hey, man, I know you're going through a lot. And just all he needed was a thumbs up. But you also knew if you didn't respond back, he was coming to find you to find out if you were okay. And that's kind of where the 10% comes in, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But he was a 10%er. He was the first 10%er, and the second one was my buddy Ben. And you know, so he always checked on me. And so the divorce was finalized January 5th, and you know, I still have all this unresolved trauma and everything else. And so you know, my bank accounts were frozen at one point. I was homeless for a little while. I slept in my car, and I don't want to say like I was homeless because it sounds so like, I don't know, but because that's not really true to the accounts were frozen, and I had too much pride to ask for help.
Yeah,
you know,
you were living out of your car.
I was, yeah.
So you know what, you were homeless.
Yeah.
Because that's what people do.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people ask me like, what was your lowest moment? And I'll tell you my lowest moment. Hopefully this will resonate with somebody. So during that point, it was about a 5-day stretch where I slept in my car. I remember coming to the police department, and I took a shower, and all my bank accounts were frozen. So I was waiting for credit cards to come in so I could go get some food. But you know, I went into the break room, and I was hungry. And you go down this hallway, and then there's another hallway to the break room, and I remember opening up the refrigerator. And I opened up the refrigerator in the break room, and there was somebody's Subway sub, full 12 inches, man. It just looked gorgeous. It was like, you know, when you open the fridge, it's like, hallelujah, you know? I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah. I remember I looked out the door again to see if anybody's coming, and my lowest moment to date was eating that sub. I fucking ate somebody's sub, man. And that's how low I was. When I finished that sub and I threw that wrapper in the trash can, I felt like the biggest piece of shit in the world.
So let me ask you, you're taking this journey to midnight, but you're taking it alone.
Yeah.
Let's put a pause on for a sec before we talk about Brian,
Yeah.
because we have EAP people here.
Yeah.
And thank you. We invited a bunch of people from local EAPs who are the best people I know, and we want something here. What would you suggest to somebody about a mistake you made that you feel like somebody in this kind of situation, what could they do better?
Yeah, I think for me, I've been on this journey now for the last 6 years since March 17th. And I've looked at EAP programs, I've looked at resilience programs, I've looked at trauma programs, co-responding models, I've looked at peer support programs, I've looked at all these different programs. And I've settled on a couple things that I think are really, really important. There's a model out of Dallas PD called checkpoints. And I can put anybody in contact with RAM, Deputy Chief Ramirez. And I think after reviewing so many, and again, I do a lot of conferences and, both for my full-time job and for the book and stuff like that, but like the checkpoints is where I see the most value. And because again, like the shooting and the baby's death and all these things that were happening, right? They're critical incidents, and I get that. And we do a very good job on the critical incidents. But that's 3 incidents out of, what about the other 297? And so what checkpoints is out of Dallas is, and again, I believe that officer to officer is the way to go about it. I think there needs to be a bridge that we got from the people in this room to people that are going through things. And so to answer your question, I think that it's all of the incidents that build up. And the critical incidents could be the straw that breaks the camel back, whatever the case is, but we need to do a better job just on the day-to-day things, right? And so if we have a full-time person, or we have somebody that, and again, I've offered to agencies here in Connecticut, like I've talked to the chief over in Rocky Hill and Chief Medina, really good guys, and I said, look, give me a chance. Like, I'm not asking for any, you don't have to pay me anything. Let me come in and let me talk to the guys. I'll do 3 different shifts, day shift, evening shift, midnights. Let me come in and talk to them for 30 minutes and we'll put them back on the road. And every week I'll come back here for 1 day and just be available with some coffee and I'll sit here in the break room. I'll work from this break room, and just anybody that wants to come in and chop it up with me and just talk life, talk about whatever. Right, like that's what I think we need to start to do. But what I'm saying is, let's come back to somebody goes to a baby call, somebody goes to a traffic accident fatality, right? It should automatically kick off a checkpoint. Mm-hmm. Bernie, you need to check in with Trooper James. Last night he responded to a fatal accident. I want you to check in with him over the next 3 weeks, once a week. Right, and initiate those checkpoints, and however that looks inside of your agency, right? Because a lot of times we let those checkpoints go. We let the 297 go, and then we get to that 3, like Benny, or like the shootings that we get into, and those become these global issues, right? And everybody wants to have your back on that global, but when we get down to the nitty gritty, that's where I think we fail.
Yeah, and I think one of the success points, being an EAP person and really so proud of the people who do at my agency and in the area and all the people in this room, is we've been tested with that.
Yeah.
A lot. And I think, sometimes maybe we miss those things in our best efforts. Oh, well, maybe we don't need a debrief for this,
Mm-hmm.
but we should for that. And making everything triage, right?
Yeah.
And having a partnership, like we have a partnership with South Windsor PD, and they lost an officer, so we went and helped. We had a partnership with East Hartford when they lost an officer, we helped.
Yeah.
And the understanding of the fact that we're all in this together,
Yeah.
Because some people will look at you and say, I'm good, and they legitimately might be. Mm-hmm. Because their coping mechanism for whatever that incident is way different than somebody else's. Or someone else is on the floor in the locker room crying hysterically. We don't know. But if we're not reaching out, then we're failing.
Yeah.
Right?
I got some interesting perspective on trauma and post-traumatic stress when we were out in Texas on the border a few weeks ago. One of the guys from Texas DPS, one of the guys from Border Patrol and one of the guys from TMPA were talking about this incident that happened on one of the boats. So DPS goes out on the boats and they patrol the waters, and he got into a shootout with the cartels on the boat at one of these kind of blind corners. Survived, real close call. 2 weeks later, back out, doing the exact same route. Ends up pulling a kid out of the water in that same spot. And so now, 2 weeks after that, he's back going through the same thing, and he said, listen, he goes, I served overseas. I was in Iraq, I was in Afghanistan. When you have a critical incident over there, an IED or something that ends up leading to post-traumatic stress, you come back and you're trying to reacclimate to society, and you're out of that scenario, right? It's horrible not to minimize that, but you're out of it. You have a fresh start, you have a fresh location.
Yep.
But in law enforcement, when that incident happens, okay, 2 days later, you guys good? Yep, you're back, and you're back on that exact same same beat.
In that same cruiser on that same street, looking at that same house day in and day out, and it's like an emotional stab wound every time you pass by it. You're 100% correct. There was a study done for Vietnam vets when they came out of Vietnam, and a lot of them had heroin and opiate addictions when they came out of Vietnam. And because they took them out of Vietnam, they were no longer there. There was this correlation between, I can't remember the stat. But there's a very high percentage of full-blown heroin addicts from Vietnam would come back and get clean because they were no longer there, seeing everything that they saw, the smells and everything else, and they're back home and they're in their in their houses with their family, and they didn't have it.
The word trigger has become politicized, if you will, right? And I don't think people understand what triggers are in law enforcement. So my buddy John ran the Arapahoe bomb squad during the Columbine massacre and then the Aurora movie theater massacre. He was the first guy in the door lifting bodies, checking for bombs underneath. And he said to this day, the smell of pennies or of popcorn completely trigger the hell out of him, or an iPhone ringer, because he said all these iPhones were going off, and it was this surreal scenario because on one hand you're thinking, is that going to set off a device?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, he had that realization that these were family members calling to make sure their loved one was okay, and that loved one was never going to answer that phone.
Yeah.
And so people don't realize the impact of these little things. Like popcorn has nothing but positive memories to me. The smell of pennies to me reminds me of the first time I got punched in the mouth, which will probably happen again in the near future. But different triggers impact different memories, and people don't have that understanding, and that's why I think it's so important to talk about these things, because that popcorn is going to mean something very different to you than someone else.
Sure.
So a quote in your book: "No rank is immune from suicide."
It's truth.
Check in. So let's talk about Brian.
Man, that's 100% accurate. Trauma doesn't care what your rank is. Trauma doesn't care how many arrests you made. Doesn't care how much dope you put in the evidence locker. It doesn't care. There's no discrimination when it comes to trauma. And so, Brian had become chief of police of my small town in Keene, New Hampshire. And like I said, he was always checking me. He was always making sure that I was good. He would stop me in the hallway like, Griff, you good? You good? Yep, I'm good. And March 9th, 2017 would have been my 15-year wedding anniversary. And I remember, you ever just wake up, today's gonna suck. Like you roll out of bed and hit your head on something or stub your toe, and you're like, fuck off. Like this day just sucks, And so that's how that day went, right? Like I got out of bed and I'm like, today just sucks. I know it's gonna suck and I'm just gonna eat it. But what do we do as cops, right? We put our heads down and we go to work. And you know what? That's a response that a lot of people use, not just first responders. A lot of people say, I'm just gonna go about my life and I'm gonna deal with it in a certain way. So that's what I did. I had a prostitution sting going on that day. And we were in a conference room very similar to this, and we're all at the table, and we're going through what we're going to do for the day. And about 9 o'clock, somebody knocks on the door and like, hey, Brian wants to see you. I'm like, damn, what the fuck does Chief want? Like, we're briefing up. I don't know. So I'm like, I'll be right back. So I went down to the office, I knock on the door, and I look in, and he's like, Griffin, you need to have a seat. And everybody in the room will laugh at this, right? Because, in my head, I'm like, are we Chief detective right now, or are we Brian Matt, right? Because do I need my union rep? Like when the chief tells you have a seat, you're like, hold up. You're doing like self-preservation mode, like, what did you hear? What did I do, right? Like you're checking, like, is my buy money good? Like did I use something for a haircut? And you know what I mean? Like did they catch me on a body cam saying something I shouldn't have? So you run through all these different scenarios in your head in about the 4.2 seconds it takes you to go from the door to the seat, right? Like you're ready to be full on defense attorney mode, right? And so I sit down, I'm still waiting for him. He had this way, like he had one eyebrow that would go up, right? And that's when you knew like he was waiting for you to say something else, right? So the one eyebrow goes up and he's like, "Are you okay?" It completely caught me off guard. I said, "Yeah." Still waiting for like the next thing, like, so about last night or whatever the case is, you know, like, and you know, because at this point I'm single and you know trying to figure out life, and he goes, "You know what today is, right?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Griffin, I'm gonna ask you one more time." I said, "You got a lot of people." He said, "You got a lot of people that you're responsible for today." He said, "If you're not mentally prepared, you're not physically ready. So are you okay? Because if you're not, I'll comp you off for the day and have somebody else lead you out." And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm good, Bri." And we sat there for a second and we looked at each other and I said, "Is that it?" "Yeah. Just want to make sure you're all right." So I get up and I walk out, and you know what I didn't say? "How you doing, bro? You good? I know today is a tough day for you. Why don't we go out and chop this up afterwards and have a cold beer tonight when we get done with this operation?" 2 hours later, Brian went home and shot and killed himself. I eat that every day. I don't know, you know, and I always say I don't know whether or not he would have made that decision regardless. I know my story, and I know what I would have done without the phone call that I received, so that hurts me even more. That what if I just said those couple words like, "Hey, I appreciate you checking on me, how are you?" And, you know, I ate that every day, you know, and I just felt so responsible for that. I felt so responsible for Benny. I felt so responsible for all these things were just coming down. And here I am divorced right now. I feel like I'm failing my children every day. You know, I just failed Brian. I failed Benny for years. You know, my ex-wife hates me. You know, she's not talking to me. My children are essentially like caught in between this. I've got this shitty one-bedroom apartment. You know, on my weekends I had to have my oldest son sleep on a fucking recliner, and my other kids are sleeping on the floor, and I just remember just laying there. I get emotional with it, but you know, and you just feel like this piece of shit, you know, and now the straw that broke the camel's back was Brian. And, you know, so I went through that week and we buried Brian, and it was kind of like this epiphany, if that makes sense, and it was a shitty epiphany because this was the trauma in my brain that was talking. This was the PTSD that clicked through and took over, and I understood suicide that week, and I understood that Brian was one of the strongest men I've ever met in my life, man. 5'8", probably like 240 of muscle, like a bowling ball. Went to Norwich University, just a monster of a man, like quiet, soft-spoken, but if you got mad, stand by, right? The tables are getting flipped and people are going to get hurt, you know? It's not like, you know, like, I mean, I don't know, like I'm a teddy bear, man. I'm a lover, not a fighter, and, you know, I'll talk a lot of shit, but I'm going to give you a hug and be like, "I'm sorry, bro, I shouldn't have said that," you know? You know, and so I understood, like, people were saying, like, it's so weak, but here, I want people to hear me say this. It wasn't a weak thing. And if you want to reach somebody when it comes to suicide, when it comes to alpha males and alpha females that do this job and do this profession, understand the background behind what they're thinking. And I'm not saying that all people think this, but my trauma caused me to believe that it wasn't suicide. It caused me to believe that I was sacrificing myself. And that's a huge distinction that I try and make in the book, and I try and make in some of my speaking. Suicide has this connotation about it that's weak and victim-based and everything else, and that's not what I was doing, that's not what Brian did. Sacrifice is different. I sacrificed 6 years in the Navy. I sacrificed a lot of time away from my children. I sacrificed a lot of things in order to defend my country, my town, my state, you know, the people that I was around, my high school that I was the SRO in. And this felt like the next step in that sacrifice. And I understand now that was the trauma. That was the PTSD checking me and telling me, "You're not committing suicide, you're sacrificing, and you need to go do this. You need to make sure that you take yourself out of the game, because your 4 boys, they need a father that's not failing like you're failing every single day. You know, and every night they slept on the floor, and every night that I had ramen noodles, and we still eat ramen noodles, but, you know, but that's all I could afford. It was just, you know, the credit card took forever to come in, man. I hate credit cards to this day because of that. You know, and I couldn't afford shit. And I remember, you know, getting a 12-pack of ramen noodles for $3.98 like that. That was going to get us through. And I could drive around to farm stands, right, and I could take eggs and not put the money in there. I hate saying that, you know. But that's how low I was, if that makes sense. And, you know, I hate saying that because, but yeah.
So we lost Brian on
March 9th.
March 9th.
Yep.
So let's fast forward.
Yeah.
March 17th, 2017.
So March 17th, I made my decision. So I actually really kind of made my decision the day before. And, you know, everybody asked me, like, you know, is there a significance in St. Patty's Day? And the answer is no. There was no, it just happened to be that day. And it's actually my parents' anniversary date, which they always had, no, there's no significance. It just happened to be that day. So the day before, I made a decision that I was going to sacrifice myself, and that I was tired of my children seeing their father as a failure. And honestly, it was probably the best day that I had, you know, in the previous 6, 7, 8 months, a year. I knew that the pain was going to be over soon. And I felt so relieved, if that makes sense. I felt so relieved that I didn't have to check my bank account anymore. I felt so relieved that I didn't have to try and go make sure see if there's any change in the couch. I felt so relieved that I didn't have to answer any more questions. I felt so relieved of everything that people were putting on me with Brian, with my children, with the divorce. And now, mind you, I know that we got a brand new chief coming in, and me and him don't get along, and we didn't get along when we worked patrol together. And I knew what was going to happen. And, you know, you get a chance to read the book, you can see what happened. But so on March 17th, I decided that I was going to commit suicide. And I was going to commit suicide at midnight. There was something right about zeros on the clock. And so that's how we get to the journey to midnight. And that's the title of the book, is how I got to midnight and where I went from midnight on. And so, you know, so I went about my day. I prepared myself and prepared everything. I know this sounds stupid, but I cleaned up the little apartment and made sure, you know, things were clean and neat. I wanted to make sure my children weren't going to find me. And then I set about writing my suicide note and what I wanted to say to this world. And I started thinking about all the different things that I wanted to say. And so I got my Yukon in the parking lot. I was gonna shoot myself in my car in the driver's seat. And I had my gun next to me. I had my suicide note. And I started listening to the music of my life. I'm an artistic type of person. Well, I should knock on wood, right? It's like, I'm not very artistic. I try to be artistic, right? I love to dance, but I'm a shitty dancer. That makes sense, man. I'm like, I'm all white when it comes to rhythm, but I love it. I love it. Like, I will dance in the middle of a fucking Applebee's, and I swear to you on my life, I will do it. If I hear the beat, and my children, all 4 of my children will attest to this. Like, my 18-year-old, like, we were in Chili's or whatever, and like Tupac came on, I started sliding. He's like, Dad, please don't. I'm like, bro, I'm feeling the beat. And I just started shimmying, got my little thing going. And he was like, Dad, come on, man, you're really embarrassing me. But I'm a dancer, and I like to sing. If you think my dancing is bad, wait till you hear my singing. So I don't.
What the hell Chili's were you in that Tupac came
Yeah,
on?
that's what I'm saying. Like, it just, the beat hit. I was like, y'all can turn that up or what? That's right. You know? But yeah. And so I'm listening to the music of my life. I'm listening to, like, the music of high school, you know, like, everybody has those songs, like, you know, Tracy Chapman, Fast Car, and, like, you know, all these different, like, songs come on that you know, and it brings you back to that time, you know. And I started thinking about, like, Blink-182 and the Navy, and, you know, all these different awesome songs that reminded me of great moments in my life. And so I was doing kind of that mental checklist of the things that I wanted to think about before I took my life. And I had my phone on Do Not Disturb. And again, mind you, this is 2017. Like, now I know a lot more about cell phone investigations, cell phone techniques, and things like that. So I would have probably powered my phone down. But by the grace of God, I have my phone on Do Not Disturb. And right about 11:15, all of a sudden my phone rings. And when I tell you it scared the shit out of me, like, I didn't I didn't know what it was, and I thought maybe I like the gun had gone off because I just kind of had it resting, and you know, and like I was in a Yukon, so it was right here. My hands kind of were just resting with the gun, and it goes off, and you just startle the shit out of me, and so I just put the gun down, and I almost just like in second nature picked it up, and it was my buddy Ben, and he said, "Griff, what are you doing?" I said, "Nothing, man. What's up?" And he said, "Why don't you come over and have a beer, man?" And I said, maybe tomorrow, Ben. Maybe tomorrow. I said, I got something I got to take care of tonight. I said, why don't we chop it up tomorrow, man? And, you know, to preface this, Ben is a person that, like, you hug him and he freezes up. You know what I mean? So, like, you put your hands on him, he tenses. So he doesn't, he's not a very emotional person. Like, I love you, Ben. Like, you're just not, man. You're not an I love you person. And so he says, Griff, before I let you go, man, I want to tell you two things. I said, yeah. He goes, number one, I love you. He said, number two, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And as you're going through what you're going through, I want you to know that I'm here for you. And I remember the way that made, like, the I love you, like, stuck. You know, and almost like in a stale air type of like, and I said, you know, at about 11, 18, I made the best decision of my life. I said, if today's a good day to die, so is tomorrow. And I'll tell everybody out there, if you hear me, today's a good day to die, so is tomorrow. And when tomorrow comes, guess what? Tomorrow's a good day to die, so is the next day. And I did that on March 18th, and I did it on March 19th, and on March 20th, I woke up and said, if today's a good day to die, so is tomorrow, and I kept going through my day. And I did that, Bernie, for about probably 4 or 5 months, and just kept pushing it off one day at a time, 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 and I finally changed that mentality to, today I'm gonna do something good. And sometimes it was something good for myself or somebody else, and I'll raise my right hand and swear to God on this. It's I don't know how many days it's been since March 17th, 2017, but every day of my life since then, I've done something good for myself or for somebody else. In the last probably 2 or 3 years since God's given me the platform to do the stuff with the book, has been for somebody else. Like, for example, I'll tell you about yesterday. So we're on a train coming up from Amtrak. I had a meeting down in DC with my full-time job, and the train next to us, we got delayed for about an hour, right? The train next to us broke down, so we had to load up all these passengers from the other train, standing room only, right? I have 4 seats all to myself, you know, like I'm a big dude, my feet are stretched out, I got laptops, everything else, thinking about this podcast, what I wanted to say, you know, things that I wanted to make sure that we caught, you know. And all of a sudden, people just sitting in this seat, then this seat, then this seat. Now, the lady comes over and she's like, there's going to be no empty seats. It's going to be standing room only from essentially right outside of Baltimore all the way into Penn Station in New York. And so there's 2 ladies sitting next to me. And so Matt Griffin, prior to 2017 when I had done this, but Matt Griffin yesterday got up and said, y'all have a seat. I don't even like saying those things because I feel like I take away from it if I explain. There's sometimes it's just like somebody drops something, I pick it up for them. Somebody needs something, I just do it, you know. I was down in St. Martin, and a couple got off the cruise ship, and they came down and they were sitting on the beach, and they're crowding these 4 chairs, right, at the resort we were at, right, in the low bougie-ass resort and shit like that. And this couple got really upset that this different colored skin family was right up close to them on the sand. And so they pull one of the people over that lays out the chairs, like, about these people, right, that you need to do something. And I sat there for a couple minutes listening to this, and I'm like, you got to be shitting me right now. So I got up, and I was 2 seats, I was essentially a row behind them. I got up, I flagged the kids out of the water, and Mom and Dad came over. I said, I want you guys to sit right here next to me, and I asked the guy to give me a couple more chairs. And so we sat right behind there talking shit about them the whole time, so it felt great. Felt great. So, but shit like that, you know, like that's how we make this world better, you know, I think. And to me, that's the journey to midnight, man. That's being a 10%er. You know, 10% of first responders, we don't want to, you know, 90% of people don't want to talk about trauma. They don't want to talk about feelings and emotions and things like that. And it's like the 10% of us we will ask you how you're doing, and we care what the answer is. And I care what the answer is. Yeah. And my phone's always on, man. I'm always ready to pour a cold drink or have a glass of scotch or put on a coffee or whatever it is, just and listen. I'm well, none of us are anything great. I'm just willing to listen. And
All right.
so,
I got to throw something out there. So he didn't tell me your backstory, right? He just said, we got this guy coming in who's going to inspire a lot of people.
okay.
And I was like, roger that, let's do it. We have collectively, between Law Enforcement Today, Blue Lives Matter platforms, we have almost 3.4 million followers on Facebook. We have about 600,000 YouTube subscribers, about 400,000 on Instagram, a couple 100,000 each on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, about 1 million subscribers on email. I would like to pledge to you today that any stories, any photos, any articles, any content that you think will inspire others, I guarantee you we will distribute it to that entire audience. Let's put some rocket fuel behind the lives that you're saving, man.
Thanks, brother.
And here's the thing, you're never going to know about the lives that you changed, the lives that you saved.
Right.
You might one day get that bottle of whiskey out of the blue. You might never get that, but just know that we've seen it firsthand. Man, I've sat down with surviving spouses and kids of officers killed in the line of duty, over 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
And I know, I can tell you without question that those stories through that platform have saved countless lives. So let's put some rocket fuel behind the blessings that God's given you to be able to change some lives.
And he's been so good, man. He has been so good and so faithful. And I was saying to Bernie, you know, when I wrote the book, when I wrote Journey to Midnight, it was chapter by chapter. And I made a pledge to Brian. And it took me about 18 months to write the book, but I probably wrote the book about 20 times, right? So like I made a pledge to Brian if I got a certain job that I talk to him all the time. Anytime anybody goes to the Hero Tunnel, so every time I go through the Heroes Tunnel, because I travel a lot between New York and every time I go through the Heroes Tunnel, I talk to Brian. And I said to him, I said, look, if I get the certain job I need, you know, I'm gonna write our story. And so I didn't read the book all the way through until it was done. And I was saying this to Bernie, right? So I would write an entire chapter and then get up on the plane and I would read it. And I'm like, man, that sucks. That's not what I want. And I would delete the whole thing, right? And not copy it. So I couldn't just like change a little bit of it, you know, because that's stupid, right? Like, and so I probably wrote it 20 different times, but what I'm going here, Kyle, is what I realized after I read my story from start to finish was that, did chapter 1 suck? Yep. Does chapter 3 suck? Yep. Does chapter 7, does chapter 8 suck? Yep. But chapter 9, I would not be here and I wouldn't be alive if chapter 1, 3, 5, and 7 didn't happen. And it was so clearly apparent that somebody had a hand in this. Because if this didn't happen here, I wouldn't have survived with the cartel. If this didn't happen here, I wouldn't have survived with, you know, XYZ. I wouldn't have, you know, done all these different things. And it's so eye-opening, like how his grace for me has been amazing, and I couldn't be more thankful for you guys, man. It means the world to me. It really does.